Welcome to the month's Best New Releases podcast, where we interview the authors behind some of the month's best new releases in publishing. Today, I'll be talking to journalist, broadcaster, and author Julia Raeside, whose novel Don't Make Me Laugh came out earlier this year in hardback and was released as a paperback in August at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I was so interested to read this book as a proof earlier on in the year. I've always really enjoyed Julia's journalism. She's written for The Guardian, The Times, The Observer, and The Big Issue, among others. Her debut novel looks at the twin topics of Me Too and the comedy industry. She's had shining reviews from all sorts of people, from Marian Keyes, Jenny Colgan, and Russell T Davies, and recently, very deservedly, was longlisted for the Comedy Women in Print Award. I am so pleased to have you here, Julia.
Oh,
Welcome.
thank you so much for having me. How lovely.
So perhaps we can just jump straight in.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit about the story behind Don't Make Me Laugh, the story as you tell it? Actually, I'm going to do that question again. Um, Welcome, Julia. It is so wonderful to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
It would be great if we could kick off with you telling us a little bit about the story, and how you came up with the idea.
Yeah, so the novel is set, effectively present day. It's about a well, not about a journalist, sorry, that's me. It's about, can we start that again?
Start it again. Do you want me to
I'll
do
just
the
answer
question?
the,
It's a
no, I'll
very,
just answer
do
the
you know, it's a
question.
very warm day, isn't it? Go on then,
I'm
you
wearing
do
a
your
cardigan, I
answer.
don't know what I was thinking. Yeah, yeah. Um, so it's about a radio producer called Ali. She's just turning 40. Her life's a mess. Her dad's just died. And she's been having a horrible affair with a married colleague. So she's kind of at her lowest ebb. And she meets this comedian at a comedy club who is charming and interested and really engaged with her straight away. And they kind of become fast friends. And that kind of leads her into the world of stand-up comedy and the kind of the London comedy circuit, where she starts to meet other people as well. And initially, while this friendship is possibly blossoming into something more and she's having quite intense feelings, she starts to understand that the world of comedy is quite a tricky place. With It's not as jolly and happy as it seems on the surface, and that especially the women working in comedy are having a really tough time, or have had to get where they are, have had to come through this obstacle course of dodgy men, dodgy promoters, other comedians, sort of like a free-for-all kind of playground for some of them to just commit sexual assaults and have weird sort of side relationships with people and just generally cause havoc and leave a trail of victims. So she starts to get familiar with this world, and then the friendship with the comedian Ed turns to something else, and then she kind of finds herself almost tumbling down the rabbit hole, and she ends up at the Edinburgh Fringe, where this organization are planning to kind of bring about this big Me Too reckoning in the world of comedy. And so that's kind of where the book really sort of climaxes. So
Um,
that's mm.
it's a brilliant story, and it's incredibly compelling. And I don't want to give too much away about that amazing denouement at the Edinburgh Festival. But you launched the paperback at the Edinburgh Festival a couple of weeks ago, and I just thought that was fascinating because the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, for anyone that doesn't know, is a massive celebration, training ground, performance space for really well-known comics, lesser known comics, people trying to get their careers going. And to all intents and purposes, it's a real massive celebration, piece of work, party for comedy. And
Yeah,
your novel really shines a light on the darker, much more uncomfortable issues that hide in the shadows. How was it launching the paperback at such a jovial event?
yeah. Well, I went around ruining comedy like the bad fairy. No, I genuinely it was really exciting to be up there, because I think I always have to go back to remember, and obviously, there are big inequalities about who can afford to take a show to Edinburgh now because it's so prohibitively expensive. But of the people that had made it up there, I just went to see loads of women and non-binary people doing stand up and had like an absolute blast. I saw a couple of guys as well, because they're not all bad. But yeah, it reminded me what a brilliant place the comedy scene is, and how much good and light and hope there is in it. So actually, it didn't feel like a kind of yeah, it didn't feel like going into the lion's den, if you were. It's much more like, I think that side will win out in the end, and I think the kind of misogyny. I'm hoping it's slowly going to die with those men as they die eventually. But the actual experience of being in Edinburgh this year was really fun and hopeful and lovely, and um, obviously not everybody in comedy can get there, but the people I saw were, just filling rooms, women, non-binary people. They weren't all white guys being, kind of
Mm,
inclusive and having their own little kind of like sausage party. It was a really exciting time
mm.
to be up there.
So let's talk about the world of comedy because it's a really really great setting for some of the issues that you talk about. I used to work in comedy, and I just thought one of the I think your novel works on so many different levels, but the clear research that you went into, there was so much that was so authentic and true about the world. And I thought when I was rereading it again yesterday, that you describe a party, which to all intents and purposes is just a sort of normal fun, loads of people in a room with booze, as
Mm.
coldly strategic. I mean, it's
Yeah.
full of comics, agents, producers, and that is actually it's a very interesting way of describing it because there's real truth to that. That despite
Yeah.
that kind of joviality and the booze and 11 o'clock at night and everything that goes on, there is those parties are often peopled by, there's a plan in place. Most people are there with a bit of a plan to talk to somebody who can get them somewhere else. So there is often a chilly edge to some of them, alongside all of the fun stuff. So I thought that was really great. I thought all of the
Thanks.
banter between the women, but banter between the men, banter between men and women. And the other thing I was going to say, that really queasy boundary blurring in comedy, where it's completely legitimate to have a business meeting at 11 o'clock after 2 pints, having seen a show, in the bar of the Soho Theatre, and you're sitting down, you're talking about a radio idea or a live idea. And that is not a normal way of doing business in most industries, and can sometimes be a breeding ground for all sorts of conversations you wouldn't otherwise have with somebody.
Yeah, I can
Um,
only imagine. And I think it's so it's so heartening to hear someone who has worked in that world. You were so embedded in that world for a long time to kind of say that it sort of had the ring of truth about it, because I think, there's only so much. I couldn't go and sit in meetings with comedians and their agents, or, or that kind of
mm,
thing. But, from how people talk about this to up to a point, you can kind of get a sense of that kind of constant strategizing, while you're trying to be the funniest person in the room and light it up and make everyone love you. The party I think you're talking about might have been, it was like in a TV green room. So it's sort of,
that's right, yeah.
and I'm sure you've been in loads. I've been in a couple of those where you just watch the kind of the newer comedians going over to
Mm.
either the host or the producer and just sort of making sure they've left a good impression and they get booked again. And, there's a lot of, it's all, it's just social skills. It's just, but the anthropology of it fascinated me so much,
Mm.
because everything in comedy, the thing about it, I think that makes it uniquely good for this is it seems like such an informal place, that like the gigs are informal. Comedians often aren't in, like, I mean, some of them are, but lots of them don't come on in amazing costumes. They come on in jeans and a jumper and do their set. And just the furniture around it, it's also informal. Meetings at 11 o'clock in the Soho Theatre bar. There's too much informality, which means as a workplace, it is prone to all of these extremely troublesome things, because there's just no HR, there's no boundaries quite clearly drawn, so everything is blurred, and it's when the problems start to happen is in these blurred boundary spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's so right. And the other thing about comedy, of course, is that at its heart is there's an amazing quote that you open the book with, which is a Gilda Radner quote. So I'm just going to read it out. Comedy is very controlling. You are making people laugh. It is there in the phrase, making people laugh. I mean, it is almost a divine gift, I think, to make somebody laugh, and you have to work
Yeah,
really hard at it. But once you can do it, that I mean, it's like, you draw disciples to you. So people
exactly.
want to be in that gang, right? And I think you just really painted that picture very well. So yeah, so what was and I want to sort of talk about the emotional architecture of your characters a bit later, but again, comedy, it is intoxicating, isn't it? It's a wonderful thing.
Exactly. And I think the idea for the book really solidified when I thought about that, the power to intoxicate a room full of people. And once you've kind of got them intoxicated, they're sort of laughing and throwing their heads back. You've kind of got them in your control. They'll defer to you like a priest or a teacher, they'll kind of go with you. And then all those social rules that we know we have in a comedy club. If you heckle, then you'll be kind of picked off from the group and kind of taken down and dealt with. And you know, the social contract means that if you want to enjoy the show and not get rejected from the group, you kind of just stay laughing along and enjoying what the comedian wants you to enjoy. And I just thought about that power in the wrong hands is a very dangerous thing. And that desire to control the room, obviously, lots of comedians I go and see, just they get something quite benign but beneficial out of that feeling of being in control. Always remember Fern Brady talking about being autistic, and it's like her place to go and check that she's doing okay. If she's on stage and she says something, she gets a reaction back, and it kind of calms her, her autistic worry about the fact she can't judge emotional cues, because she's getting confirmation that she's okay. Because they're laughing. But obviously, in the wrong hands, that power to control the room can be used for really nefarious purposes. And I think there was the idea that there are all the headlines tell us, and the gossip and the rumor tells us, there are too many men on the comedy circuit who get that power, realize how great it is, and then use it off stage as well as on stage. So they realize they can manipulate and control a room, and then they do it with women, fans, young men, some of them, but they do it with people who are kind of looking, you're tilted up looking at them up on stage. You're looking up to them and in perfect position to then be controlled by them. And the fan kind of celebrity relationship plays into that as well. So yeah, the idea for the book really came when I thought, what if that power was in the wrong hands? Because clearly it often is. And, the stories were so many that I was like, I have to work out a way to discuss the Me Too situation in comedy, which is really bad.
And it's really interesting you say that, because I felt like the way you built your characters, the way the way you built the characters and the way you drew the themes through the characters, it all had that one thread that ran through it, which is, as you say, that kind of there is a herd mentality at work. And when you talk about the rules of a room, you are extradited from the room if you behave badly. If you're all laughing together, you are part of a group and a gang, and you are together. And all the way from that kind of macro issue down to that group of women. I think where Ali was talking to some of her friends or colleagues, and you say in the book she had a moment of I can't remember how you described it. I think it was like just a moment of FOMO when she realized everyone else was going to Edinburgh and she wasn't. It's
Yeah,
a very human it's a very human issue, isn't it? To want to feel part of something and not to feel on
yeah,
the outside of something else. And
that's it.
that and then you bring it down to even that that more refined level about that relationship between Ali and Ed, where he's always making her feel constantly sort of on the outside of something, bringing her in and pushing her out again, bringing her in, like sort of just scraping at a scab that she's already very vulnerable, isn't she? And
Yeah.
has proper self-esteem issues, and he almost smells the blood and then starts to kind of pull her in and out again. I thought that was really wonderful. Like, talk to me about that kind of, yeah, the psychology of your characters and how you built that, because it was very cleverly done, I thought.
Thank you. Well, I think the one thing I was really sure about was that the Ali, the protagonist, would get pulled into this world, but she wouldn't be. I don't know. It wouldn't have helped my story to have her be a perfect victim of this terrible bad man, like the kind of Red Riding Hood and the wolf, because too often we talk about these stories as though we can only listen to a victim if we've made sure she's completely, she's got wings and a halo and she's never done anything wrong in her life. It's important to talk about the abusive situation I end up describing is between, yes, a really bad man, but someone who's flawed, and her own flaws are used against her. So her desperation to be included is because she's lonely. She's kind of vulnerable because she's probably not got a great relationship with her mum. Her mum's not very nice. Her dad's just died. She's having an affair with a married colleague when we meet her. Like, she's not by any means kind of like this pure, lovely person who's about to be sullied by some dreadful blighter. It's much more complicated because people are more complicated and life is more complicated. So I wanted to make her vulnerable, but not just like a sitting duck. So she has internalized misogyny. She has, a mistrust of other women, which I think she obviously learns to get over as the book goes on. But she's, in lots of ways, she's not that nice, but she doesn't deserve this. And I think I've had so many conversations there where, men in comedy, the ones I know, maybe I said, oh, I've heard that guy that you're doing a gig with, not, I mean, he's not, probably raped anyone, but he's really got a track record of being absolutely awful to women. And they'll kind of say which women. And if you mention a name and she like, oh, but she's mad. Like, oh, they deserve it, the mad ones. They can be treated like this. And I thought it was so important that she wasn't flawless. So she's a bit of a mess, but she kind of, I hope, learns something through the book about female solidarity and trusting women and using them as your allies and your friends and looking after them and letting them look after you. But at the beginning, she's a sitting target for this guy because she doesn't trust other women. And they're exactly the kind of targets those men are looking for, the isolated from the pack ones. In the same way, they'll pick off a heckler. They'll pick off a woman who's crying in a bar on her own.
Absolutely. And I think just to go back to what you were saying about her relationship with other women in the story, I thought you trod the line between her collaboration and competitiveness and those two themes really, really well. So there was never a kind of, it felt like you had written entirely about that subject without judgment, and which
That's
was
really,
really interesting and really fascinating. You were very true to your characters in that sense. And I almost I don't want to give too much away about the story, but with each of the women involved with this comedian, they seem to exist on a very different part of the journey for Ed. So seemed to me he'd take women on a particular journey and he'd start and he'd lure them in and then something would happen. And, so, each one of these women was on a slightly different part of the journey. And Ali was quite near the beginning, which enabled her to look forward and, collaborate with those women and talk to them and work out how she was going to resolve this issue in her own mind. And in doing so, I thought that really cleverly illustrated the complexity of the Me Too argument and all of the different micro and macro ways in which sexual harassment can occur. That they were almost sort of embodied each one of those. That, and I don't know how intentional that was, but I thought that was a very kind of holistic way of looking at the argument.
thank you. I think I wanted to explore the behavior I kept hearing about again and again, which really I think troubled me most because I suppose it's quite easy to say sexual assault is illegal. So if anyone's caught doing that, they should be, put through the legal process, what there is of it. But the behavior that's not illegal, in just in law at the moment, or incredibly hard to prove, is in this grey area of emotional manipulation. So the behavior that I thought, yes, sexual assault is terrible and important and it's being talked about, and so it should be, and is prevalent on the comedy circuit from what I can see. But these particular characters that fascinated me and kind of appalled me were the ones who they seem to sort of collect women. Obviously, they're touring all over the country often, traveling salesmen, they pick up people in every town. It's kind of that sort of idea. And they don't necessarily even have affairs with them, but they have this supply of adoration and admiration kind of always on tap. And obviously the internet's really helped them with that. So it's like an emotional kind of, I don't know, what's the word? Like you're kind of shackled to this guy. And so are lots of other women. And they're all experiencing a similar thing, which is that he kind of takes a real interest in them and then starts to use their dependence on his approval as a way of just getting them to do stuff. And obviously in the book, I won't talk about what he gets them to do, but it's pretty nasty. And it's kind of like gaining consent for things by deception. So in that way, it is a crime, I suppose, but it would be very difficult to drag these people into court of law. But what they do is horrible, leaves a trail of victims. And I think if their friends really knew what they were like, they'd probably not want to be around them. But they tend to be people who hide their proclivities and their behavior really well. And they can be popular and, acclaimed and really successful and do really well in their careers and seem to have lots of mates. but they can do this really unpleasant emotional thing. And I just think I'd never read a book about that or even really seen a film about that. I wanted to talk about a behavior that we still don't quite have the language to talk about, and just start naming it and start sort of describing it, because it seems to be there's a lot of it about.
And on the subject of talking about it, when you were researching the book, did you find that people were quite willing to discuss these themes and these subjects without naming names, of course, because that's part of the difficulty of this subject, but were you able to, I mean, how much of your research was done through talking to people and then other through other means?
I mean, certainly in terms of this emotional kind of landscape, obviously it was quite a lot of talking to people I know quite well, and maybe just, hearing about historical situations that are long in the past, but sort of, being able to see parallels with stuff that I don't, perhaps a situation I can see from a distance and think that doesn't look quite right, but I don't know the details. The rumor in comedy is kind of, it's, you know what it's like. It's like it's just constant. There's a constant rumor mill going, and women especially are using that kind of the power of gossip and rumor to sort of spread information. So I think the more detailed stuff, I mean, a lot of it, I just had to kind of imagine it. But also, it's a first novel. I'm, not 1,000 million miles away from the main character, sort of maybe 10, 15 years ago. And I definitely saw in myself, probably quite latterly, like, doing therapy in my 40s, a pattern of, I mean, I think I'm quite lucky that I never really had access to comedians in my 20s because it would have gone very badly. But I didn't, I had lots of experience with these rubbish men who were mean to me or kind of manipulated me or did, because I had back then very, very low self-esteem. And I think obviously I could feed my own memories of feeling like that into this too. So it's kind of a bit of a mishmash, but I did talk to a couple of people who I know really well and were just happy to kind of describe, you know, experiences like this, not necessarily even with comedians, but like, close friends who talked to me about being in relationships like this, perhaps more recently, and what
Mm,
it did to them and what it
mm.
felt like. It was
And
kind of a big mishmash, but definitely a lot of me in there too, and how I think I'd react in that situation.
And then, of course, when transgressions do happen, I think it can be very easy from an external perspective to say, well, why didn't she just say something or report it? And again, one of the things that you really look at in detail is the complexity around that and how it is rarely that straightforward. Because often, when you are something like that happens, in any industry, to you may well be. I wrote about it fictionally for my second novel, and remember researching it a lot at the time. Stories about people making decisions to talk about what had happened to them. Quite often, there's a lot to be lost from their side, and that can be livelihood, that can be, questioning whether they really want to be known for the rest of their career as the person who spoke about an A-list celebrity's transgressions. Do they? So those a series of questions often have to be gone through. It can be deeply uncomfortable, and I think you really look at the with that network of women within the stories and the conversations they have, and the point at which Ali really gets the bit between her teeth, and they start to devise the plan. And there's just a wonderful twist at the end, and it was really satisfying. I really urge everybody to read it. It's a really very, very satisfying way of bringing some of that stuff together. And you do get that really wonderful charge of, after all of that hard work and some of the conversations that are so difficult to have about those experiences, those women just found that way of like, they just nailed it. And, of course, that doesn't happen in real life all the time. It rarely happens, which is one of the wonderful, powerful things about fiction. But yeah, I thought that was it's a very, very difficult subject to write about because it is so complicated and is so not straightforward and is part of that blurred, boundaries that you've been talking about with
Yeah,
comedy.
I think the thing that it's hardest perhaps to get across, which I hope I sort of have a bit in the book, is the the reason women don't notice what's happening to them at the time, or speak up about it, or even straight after they've left that situation, they don't necessarily talk about it, is shame. The two biggest things I think that we don't talk about that are the driving factors in these relationships going on for so long are power and shame.
Mm.
So the power dynamic you enter into with, let's say it's a famous comedian, is that they're on probably the TV, they're famous, they're rich, they've bewitched, rooms full of people, that they've got that kind of that it's the old meaning of the word, the glamour. Glamour is like an old term for kind of magic, casting a spell. They've kind of been able to do that over rooms full of people, and then they make you feel lucky for getting to spend time with them one on one. So you're in this kind of power imbalance immediately, a fan and a celebrity. It's not an equal relationship. So you might overlook the early signs, and they do it incrementally and gradually, like, a lobster slowly coming to the boil in a pot. You don't notice what's happening to you at the time. And by the time you do notice, you've been kind of made complicit in your own abuse, your own manipulation, and you feel shame, you feel stupid. And I've talked to, as well as, friends and using my own sort of references. I in my other job as a journalist, I've talked to women who've been in these situations with celebrities, because we're, the Russell Brand story that's obviously ongoing, and now the charges have been made, and he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. That those stories are being worked on all the time. I'm working on a couple, but they take a long time and they're very hard to stand up legally. But talking to those women, when I've been privileged enough to talk to them, it's it's the shame that's the worst thing. And then, the narrative is always, if a woman stands up, and you've written about this yourself, but a woman stands up and says, that guy's bad, he did this bad thing to me and these other women, the first thing society does to them is say, you're lying, because they like the guy, perhaps, or you're doing this for other reasons. You're doing it for fame or money. They never get paid, and the fame that you may get for being one of these people who stands up is at the very best victim shaming, like total and utter victim shaming. So the power imbalance is the first thing, and then the shame those women and sometimes young men feel at being taken advantage of, being tricked, being hoodwinked, is so total that they don't want to stand up and say what happened to them, because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to have been tricked, and the idea that we still don't talk about abuse that way. We talk about it as something that we either don't believe. Literally women standing on Capitol Hill at the moment saying, Donald Trump, I was definitely raped and abused by your good friend Jeffrey Epstein, and he's in the White House going, it's a scam, it's a Democrat kind of hoax. They will always find a way to sort of downplay this kind of accusation, the patriarchy, people not interested in hearing it, and we need to talk about it differently. And I hope the book is a way of having at least a conversation about that.
Absolutely. And of course, shame is only shame when it's in the shadows, isn't it? And when you bring it out of the shadows and you're telling stories and about these situations and enabling a sort of fictional catharsis, then, the hope is that in pushing that through stories, that sort of slightly just pushes the needle, that kind of micro, a
Yeah.
micro inch in the direction of this is a good thing. Just talk about it.
Yeah.
Tell me, Julia, I also want to talk to you. Tell me, did your journalism, you started off in journalism and this is your debut novel. How
Yeah.
much of your, like, it feels like you brought a lot of your investigative skills to bear on the story. How did you find the discipline of sitting down and writing fiction, a longer form piece of fiction, um, with your journalism?
I mean, I wish I could say I've literally done podcasts about like my routine when I write, and you just
Mm.
think, oh, God, stop lying. I mean, I had bursts of routine for sure, because you have to, but it was mostly chaos. I worked to deadlines. That's my thing. I'm pretty much programmed that way. So it was incredibly hard. You don't sell the book, and as you know, until you've kind of finished it, and that's when you can start trying to sell it. It's just getting to the end of the first draft. I think everything after that, I kid myself now, is like, oh, everything after the first draft was fine. I quite enjoyed it, but the first draft nearly killed me, because you have to really believe in the thing you're doing in order to finish it, even when you know it's terrible and you want to hurl it in the sea. And it's very like a marathon, in that I've done one marathon in my life a very long time ago, and I'm not a runner by any means. And it was just the pride I felt at getting to the end, at not stopping all the
Mm,
times I definitely wanted to stop. That
mm.
is that is still to me a slight mystery how I managed it. But at least I know now I can do it, so I can potentially do it again.
And what about the difference in editorial process as well? Having an editor, you obviously wrote the draft, sold the book, and then presume did the your editor have some notes, and then did you go away and redraft it, or was it pretty much good to go at the point at which you sold it?
No, I mean, I had, because I was so scared of showing it to someone, I did redraft it like a bunch of times before I really even sent it to an agent. And you know, that first time you're asked to send a piece of long form fiction to a total stranger is like, oh,
Mm,
no, it's real now. So, but once the publisher had taken an interest and actually, and then so my publisher bought it. It's a small publishing house. They hired in an editor to work with me, and she was just phenomenal. She's called Jo Dingley, and I just like I worship the ground she walks on. I wasn't sure how that would be because it's been with me for so long and like, who is this person? And she was just so kind of straightforward and like, her only two big edits were there were because it's a first novel and I'd just gone blah and put everything into it. Where there's a dead dad in the book, which obviously my dad had just died. So obviously my dad,
yeah.
there's
Mm.
so much of autobiography and you can't help it. The first novel, she was like, with in the nicest possible way, with the dead dad gone, it would just go a bit faster. And I was like, okay, yeah, maybe you're right, maybe you're right. And there was one other element which is to do with the heroine being from Scotland, and there was a whole other thing in the book that ran all the way through it. And those two things, she said, if you took those out, it's going to go like a rocket. And I was like, oh, she's right though. So in the end, I kind of pared down the dead dad. This is so
Yeah.
mercenary, but I wanted him in because I think her grieving was like a big part of why she was at the most vulnerable point in her
Yeah.
life, and why everything else followed. So I actually really enjoyed the editing. I thought it might be awful, and I've had great editors as a newspaper journalist and dreadful ones. Um, but whether I just got incredibly lucky with my book editor, I don't know. But I really loved working with her. And I just think you're so lonely for so long, just like plodding along trying to get this story out. And I've got great friends who obviously read early drafts and things and really helped. But the serious business of like saying, right, this is going to be a book now, really focused my mind. And there's something about the way she did it. It was like she did a letter, she marked up the text, she made it really easy for me, basically. So I ended up loving it, and I can't wait to edit another book again. And I want to do it with her. Is that possible? I'm going to try.
I hope it's possible. Are you writing another one at the moment?
I am. And it's a lot. I mean, I thought, oh, I'll go like a rocket this time. I'll be able to do it really quickly. It's like, no, life keeps getting in the way. Got to
Mm.
earn some money. Got to do this. Got to do that. So yeah, I'm slowly getting into the next idea. I have worked out that the only thing that got me through the first book was anger about the subject I was writing about. So I've realized now I just need to write about something else that makes me angry. So that's what I'm going to do.
That's such I think there's such yes, I completely relate to that. It's a powerful emotion when you're writing, isn't it? That kind of
Yeah.
because it almost sort of powers a tangle of stuff anger is a sort of hot emotion, isn't it? And it powers through this tangle of stuff. It's like have to untangle this ball of stuff and create a nice,
Yeah.
neat story.
Exactly.
Um,
And I think there were lots of moments where in real life, like, I don't know, the Russell Brand thing, I think hadn't sort of bubbled up properly while I was writing. But by the time my publisher bought it, they were like, oh, it's not about Russell Brand, is it? I was like, oh, you think there's just one? That's adorable. But
just
the
with
real
your
stories were fueling my anger. Like the Harvey Weinstein
yeah.
story was ongoing. It was great. It just really riled me up.
I want to ask you another question, which is if so, you, your journalism and your novel writing, what advice would you give somebody who wants to cross over into a different writing discipline and do something similar?
I mean, obviously, I am incredibly lucky in the friends that I have. So it really helps if you can talk to other people who've already
Mm,
done it or who are just doing the thing that you think you'd like to do. I just don't think there's any sort of substitute for that. And if you don't know, if you want to be a novelist and you don't know novelists, you find a writing group. And obviously, I say that like I would do that. I'd be too scared, obviously, to show my work to strangers. One of my friends, in fact, one of our friends, I think it's Marianne Levy,
yeah.
goes to a writing group and with these really quite viciously critical people and just goes, here's my writing, and they shred it like piranhas. But finding maybe a friendly version of that, like a nice writing group who
To
you
start
can
with. Mm,
talk to, is probably
mm,
the best way to do it.
mm,
Yeah, but you need
mm.
to talk to other people.
Yeah,
Don't just bubble.
A community is very important in such a solitary environment. So quick fire round.
Okay.
Cake or quiche?
Eat.
Quiche.
There. I love cheese.
Swim or sleep?
Oh, sleep.
Dog or cat?
Hat.
Cinema or conversation?
Conversation.
Yeah.
That was easy.
You surprised me. Um, Thank you so much, Julia. I really, really appreciate you coming to chat. It's been brilliant to talk to you about it all. I recommend the book to everybody. It's brilliant. It's such an interesting, compelling, it's funny, it's dramatic, it's just got the ingredients that you just want in any good novel. So really massive congratulations. Good luck for the shortlist for the Comedy Women in Print Prize. I keep my fingers crossed for you. And
This Jesus. It's an amazing, amazing list. I'm just very glad to have been, yeah, genuinely.
it's wonderful. It's a great thing. And very, very best of luck with the next book as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia. Right, hold on, Julia. I'm just going to stop recording.